I think no one knows the implications of the science that Craig was just talking about better than our next speaker, Governor Rosselló from Puerto Rico. We're very lucky to have him here today. He arguably has the hardest job in American politics, maybe, I would think, dealing with the aftermath of the storm and the rebuild that that's going on there. I've been to Puerto Rico 4 or 5 times since after Maria, and I can attest to both the incredible devastation that was wrought upon the island and the incredible resilience of the people there and the incredible opportunity that Puerto Rico has to rebuild in a new and different and better and stronger way. So please welcome Governor Rosselló.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. You stole my thunder there. I was going to talk a little bit about that, but let me just say how much I appreciate the previous conversation. You know, I used to be a scientist. I took a wrong turn somewhere, and now I'm in politics. But I really value the evidence-based approach, and it's something that we've been trying to bring to Puerto Rico. The other thing that I really value is the concept of ideas, the reason why we're here. So let me just throw an idea out there. How about if we can take a place and make it into a blank canvas where we can start addressing some of the concerns that we have and showcasing some of the innovative ideas that are coming around and that we are hearing over here at Aspen. Well, this is where the concept of the blank canvas approach comes in. It's what we want to do, and what would you say if I tell you that I think that the first pilot study for that concept of the blank canvas can be Puerto Rico. And it is very important to consider what we have ahead. It is the same Puerto Rico that not a lot of people knew. It is the same Puerto Rico that got ravished by the most devastating storm in the modern history, not of Puerto Rico, but of the United States. So I think it is important to give a brief history of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was a colonial territory of Spain for about 400 years. Then it was bounty in the Hispanic-American War for the United States, and it became a territory of the United States. A couple of decades afterwards, the citizens of Puerto Rico were granted U.S. citizenship. And really, that has been the political history in a nutshell. Now, why is this important? Because many of you have seen sort of the response, and many of you have learned about Puerto Rico. And it is somewhat of a geopolitical black hole, in the sense that it is still a colonial territory in the 21st century that has U.S. citizens that don't quite have the same U.S. citizens' rights as the ones that are in the mainland. And to even add to the curiosity of this, it is not a matter of being Puerto Rican or not. It is a matter of where you're at. So if I decide to move to the United States, to the mainland, I gain all of those rights immediately. No green card, no anything. Just taking a plane to Puerto Rico, I gain all of those rights. And if you were to move to Puerto Rico, you would lose them. So that is the brief history of Puerto Rico. And of course, many of this got shoved into the limelight when the major devastation happened in Puerto Rico. These are some of the images. I'm just doing them as a refresher because I'm sure that they are crystallized in your minds as they are in mine. It was a very impacting event. The whole of it in sort of short fashion. 100% loss of electricity, 100% loss of communications, no air travel within the next 5 days after the storm, no road travel within the coming days, trouble getting commodities into Puerto Rico because the ports were devastated, and different to other natural disasters where you get aid from other parts of the United States. Let's say Florida gets hit. You can get somebody from Georgia to come in and lend a helping hand. In Puerto Rico, this storm just went through the whole island, devastated, and essentially put us in a critical position for a significant amount of time. We started working on the creation of a recovery office immediately after that because we knew that as the storm was passing and as the enormous level of devastation was occurring, we had to write this out in 3 different tracks. First track, the emergency phase. How do we make sure that people are safe? How can we make sure that we can sustain life? How can we make sure that people have the basic necessities to survive? The next step was the recovery phase. Now, this has been a very long recovery. It has been a recovery process over 9 months. And the objective of this second track was to get back to normalcy. We won't get back to normal in this phase, but at least getting back to normalcy. And what does that mean? Establishing our school system, making sure that we have water, food, hospitals working, making sure that we have access to energy. That has been the most limiting step of them all. But the last one, the last track, is the one that I want to really talk to you about today that is really a great opportunity. It excites me, and as a scientist, is the one that I really want to showcase for this blank canvas approach. Now, you may be wondering, who did this god-awful writing? It was me. And this is my blank canvas for Puerto Rico. And I carry around a copy with me so that I can talk to stakeholders about what I feel should be the future of Puerto Rico. It is by no means a done deal or a one-size-fits-all solution, but it is a conversation starter and an important one so that we can consolidate all of the opportunities that we have right now and that we make sure we leverage all of those opportunities to putting Puerto Rico into a position of success and something that could be outstanding, an outstanding model towards the future. So I'll leave this. I know my advisors are cringing when I show that, but what I decided to do here, and this is the first time I'm presenting it over here because I really wanted to get the feedback of this community and of the stakeholders here in Aspen Ideas, was to talk a little bit about that, make it a little bit prettier and more digestible, and talk about what is the vision for Puerto Rico going to the future. How can we use this blank canvas approach and start drawing out what we see should be the Puerto Rico of the future now? Here is essentially something that you should have in your mind regarding the peculiarities of Puerto Rico. Different to an independent nation or to a state, we have very limited sources of funding to add value to our island. So the first one is credit, which we can use going to the markets. Unfortunately, prior to the natural disaster in Puerto Rico, we had man-made disasters of the kind of economic growth and fiscal sustainability. So we don't have that credit outlet anymore. We don't have access to the markets. The second one is transfers. Typically, it's federal transfers in the vein of the federal government giving us access to some programs, but that access is, in general, much smaller for Puerto Rico to comparable states. And it again showcases the inequality between Puerto Rico and U.S. citizens in another state. To give you an example, in Puerto Rico, we receive about a third or a fourth of the Medicaid funding that you would get in any other state. The other two opportunities for getting resources to Puerto Rico are investment and exports. And those we have to maximize and see how Puerto Rico can leverage some of the opportunities that we have to make, to add value and to get Puerto Rico up and running. So here's the vision. We see Puerto Rico in 5 to 10 years as the destination of the human cloud. What does this mean? As we see jobs change in the next couple of decades or years, we see that most jobs are becoming geographically independent. And people are looking for places where they want to live and give their services and export them everywhere in the world. Today I'll try to convince you that Puerto Rico has the natural beauty, the natural assets, but also has a certain set of resources that we are leveraging to make Puerto Rico, instead of a place where people are leaving, a place where people can come and call home. The second component is to have a Puerto Rico that's open for business. Now, if you've seen Puerto Rico in the past, unfortunately, we've had many bureaucratic obstacles that have delayed progress and growth. We have a commitment to start eradicating those processes and being a facilitator for economic growth and opportunities in Puerto Rico. The third component is leveraging our unique advantage of Puerto Rico as the connector of the Americas. We are dead smack in the middle of the Americas. We have cultural ties to South and Central Americas. We have cultural ties to North America. And we have great human resource that can make Puerto Rico the connector of the Americas, where business gets done, where finance gets done, where diplomacy gets done. That is one of the main observations and one of the main aspirations that we have. And lastly, and it goes to the concept of the blank canvas, Puerto Rico as a platform for innovation. Puerto Rico as a place where we can take great ideas, great proposals, scale them up, show that they can work, and then once they do, they can serve as a model for the rest of the world. That is what we see are some of the underlying opportunities in Puerto Rico. Now, in order to do that, we have to have some core values. Regarding this rebuilding and reconstruction, we need to focus on capacity building. Puerto Rico has been lagging on that. Resiliency needs to be in the conversation of everything that we're going to talk about in the next 10 minutes. Transparency is a must. This is going to be a reconstruction that will involve a lot of funding. And because of that, it is important that everybody knows, every stakeholder knows, that every dollar that comes in is being used towards a project that is beneficial for the people of Puerto Rico and for the world. And lastly, as with resiliency, innovation has to be a key integrating factor in everything that we're doing. So let's start drawing on these canvas for Puerto Rico. I start off with what we feel is the model for socioeconomic model for growth in Puerto Rico. It has a few components that are very important for us, and we have a certain set of tools in Puerto Rico. The tools are a plan for Puerto Rico that we developed over the course of the previous 4 years prior to our administration, a fiscal plan because right now we're under the guise of a fiscal oversight board, a Build Back Better plan that was worked with several stakeholders from non-for-profits and for-profit organizations to help us isolate those key areas of opportunity so that we can rebuild effectively Puerto Rico. And now the CDBG funding action plans for Puerto Rico. So this model is supposed to be simple, but that we can scale it up or down to make sure that we can implement changes for Puerto Rico. The first component of it, or at the top of the model, is how do we add value? The 4 arrows that I showed you earlier on are the only mechanisms where we can add value economically to Puerto Rico. So we need to see how those 4 arrows, we can potentiate them to get more economies to Puerto Rico as opposed to what has been done in the past couple of decades, which is a shrinking economy that just keeps dividing the same old pie in different places. The second component is equality for Puerto Rico. Equal treatment, and it is important that we find a final solution. I support statehood as this final solution, as people of Puerto Rico have voted twice in the past 5 years to achieve that so that we can have equal rights as American citizens relative to all of those that live in the states. A government that's effective and transparent. This is very important so that we can address the fiscal chaos in Puerto Rico and, of course, the concerns from our people. Fiscal responsibility. We've been overspending in our budgets for the past couple of decades, and really, it's not until now that we feel the brunt of that overspend. Now, here are the two bases of this model that are critical. Typically, it's sort of seen in the opposite way, but the way I view it is that we need, in order to achieve that, we need to have a strong foundation of science, technology, and innovation. Everything needs to be evaluated. Everything needs to be assessed. We need to be data-driven in order for us to make better decisions as policymakers. And the last component is the development of our human resource for to maximize those capacities. So that is one of the critical components. And how do we start doing this? We start doing this by seeing that the great opportunity lies not in building bridges or building just safer homes, but in taking everything together, taking policy, taking our historic, chronic problem areas in Puerto Rico and start trying to fix them, taking areas of opportunity and maximizing them, and putting them all together with the appropriate policy so that once the rebuild funding is done, we are left with a stronger base for Puerto Rico to just continue on growing. If we just use this funding, as other jurisdictions have in the past, to rebuild without asking to make it better or to make changes in policy, we'll end up as those jurisdictions, which is in a worse off position. Some of these jurisdictions made policy calls that might have seemed good in the short run, but in the long run, when the money left, it was detrimental, and some of them are still paying for it. So we really want to integrate what the changes to the policy are with the money that's going to come into Puerto Rico. We're committed to making a new government. We've implemented a new government law. We've started a digital reform in Puerto Rico. Our government gives 340 services. No government should be giving that many services when you have NGOs, when you have academia, when you have other components that can be yielding those services, and you can narrow the focus of our government to be more effective. We're working on ways to get a grasp on a newer local government that's more effective, eliminating the red tape. We've established government as a single employer so that now that we're making the changes, there is opportunity of growth within our government. We established the new Government Act, I'll talk about that in a second, that allows us to consolidate our government into one that's more effective. And we started to downsize and externalize some of the services that the government is giving. So here's why we're doing this. Puerto Rico has 131 agencies. That is 5 to 6 times as much as probably any of your jurisdictions. That is just simply unsustainable. It becomes a burden, they become silos, and bureaucracy takes a hold on action. So what is our commitment? We want to consolidate and change that into about 35 agencies, something that's more manageable. We established a new law so that we can facilitate that and create a new government. That's one of the parts that we're working on. Secondly, we want Puerto Rico to be open for business. Now, what does this mean? Puerto Rico has a toolkit of incentives that's enviable by any jurisdiction, but we really haven't promoted them effectively. We have what's called Law 20 and 22, which make Puerto Rico the best and most competitive jurisdiction for you to export your services anywhere in the United States. We have a new DMO that will promote Puerto Rico as a tourist destination. Typically, it was run within government. Now we're working with the non-for-profit sector so that they can run this promotion. Same with the promotion of Puerto Rico as an investment destination. We're working on, we've worked on laws that will make Puerto Rico a place or the most competitive place. If you have intellectual property, a patent, and you want to commercialize it, we have a 50% credit, 50% cash credit that goes to you if you come to Puerto Rico and make that, that patent or that PI grow. We have a permits reform that we've enacted. We've liberalized some of the labor laws, and now we have opportunity zones in Puerto Rico. So we have a toolkit that can now make Puerto Rico much more of a competitive place. We just need to leverage it with some of the other things that are on the pipeline. We're also going to work with a tax reform for Puerto Rico. the federal tax reform sort of railroad Puerto Rico, again, because we're treated as a foreign jurisdiction for tax purposes. So there is an additional, immediately after Maria, mind you, immediately after Maria, the first action that was taken by Congress when, many of them came to Puerto Rico, spoke in pretty podiums like this and said that they were here to support the people of Puerto Rico. The first action was to pass a tax reform bill that railroaded Puerto Rico and added an additional burden on a base erosion tax. So now we're going to take actions on our own. We've taken actions with technology to increase revenues. We're already showing signs of that. We're reducing the tax rates to make Puerto Rico much more competitive. Of course, this is based on modernizing our platform. It wasn't modern in the past. Some of the things that we're doing right now have been done in other places decades ago. And of course, making our whole tax system a little bit more effective. The recovery funding. This is the piece that ties a lot of these things together. Because we had a lot of these pieces, but consider Puerto Rico being on a fiscal crunch. Consider Puerto Rico not having the wherewithal to print its own money and having a limited cash box and having to change infrastructure, old infrastructure. Recognizing that we had to do it, but really not having the money to do it. Now, this recovery funding is an opportunity to identify those needs and make significant changes towards the future. We're talking about $50 to $100 billion that are going to be coming to Puerto Rico. Now, again, it is critical that we use this effectively, so we are building an Office of Recovery, the fastest, most effective, most transparent way. We're going to have our office ready, probably on average 2 years before any other disaster office was commissioned in other states, so that we can commence this process of rebuilding much more effectively. That includes certain areas of priority. I'll skim through that. But the idea is to have a holistic approach to this recovery. Envision all of the data that we have. So we can have maps of different areas of need and policy that we want to address. So for example, poverty. You can have a map of Puerto Rico showcasing where the critical areas of poverty, and if it is part of our public policy to start eliminating, reducing that poverty gap, then we should use this as a guiding principle to see where we invest and to start making the policies of where we change. Overlaying that, we should put an asset map of where the assets are in Puerto Rico for industrial, for development, for agriculture, for growth in general, for tourism, so that we can leverage those and start saying where we're going to invest, and we can talk to stakeholders and say, this is a prime location for you to come in Puerto Rico. We already have that map ready in Puerto Rico. Infrastructure map. Where are our needs? Where is our critical infrastructure? And where do we need to put the new critical infrastructure for the new Puerto Rico? Population map, so that we can start assessing really what are the needs in the different population centers and that we can plan accordingly and effectively. This had never been done previously in Puerto Rico. And of course, in the mindset of resiliency, getting the new floodplains, the critical areas, so that once we rebuild that Puerto Rico, we don't leave people that are in vulnerable housing in there, but we use this opportunity to make them transition into effective and safe housing. That is part of the recovery plan, and it leverages a lot of the things. As I said earlier, it is an opportunity to see chronic areas of problem in Puerto Rico and leapfrog into the future as a great opportunity. Energy is that sector. Puerto Rico is on average 28 years older as an energy authority than anywhere else in the United States. We are run mostly on petroleum fuel. 98% of the energy is fossil fuel derived. And this is an opportunity to now leapfrog into the future and create an Energy 2.0 model that other jurisdictions might have thought about, but really we're in a special position to implement. What does that Energy 2.0 model look like, and why are we so excited about this opportunity? First of all, we're getting private partners in on this effort. We're going to leverage some of the funding that's going to come through the recovery, but we're also going to get the private sector in. we're going to get a robust regulatory framework for Puerto Rico so that we can guarantee the best prices for our folks. But this is the part that I'm really excited about. It's giving the consumer the control. It's making our system customer-centric. The people of Puerto Rico, when we're done with this model, will be able to choose. They'll be able to choose if they stay within the grid or if they opt out of the grid. If we can make micro and nano grids for different alternatives. And within that path, we are making the system much more resilient as well. We are going to hijack renewables. Our focus is getting to, right now we're at about 1% renewables. We want to get to 40 to 45% renewables in this initial step of the transformation. It is part of the public policy that we're focusing on. And of course, we want to start eradicating some of the fuels that damage our environment and that, quite frankly, are not as good. We want it to be more resilient and reliable. Our energy system, as you saw probably in the news, one excavator hit one of our towers, and it caused a major blackout on 99.4% of our population. One excavator. We want to lower the cost. Puerto Rico right now, we're in the direction of 30 cents a kilowatt hour, just to give perspective. Florida is about 4 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So this is a major driver of economic growth, and we're going to potentiate. And of course, we want distributed generation for Puerto Rico moving forward. So we want microgrids everywhere within the island. We want different alternatives to push forward these initiatives. And we also have a great opportunity with P3s, public-private alliances. Right now, we have the most aggressive pipeline in the United States of public-private alliances. We've already started a project out to market called Student Life for student housing. A ferry system. Our ferry system in Puerto Rico has never worked. We're finally going to get some components for it to work. Energy is a critical component of this P3 model as well. Ports, to make Puerto Rico a multi-port destination. We have 4 great ports, but really under the storm, we only had one that could help us out. Water metering, that's old in Puerto Rico. We can make it more effectively. And in Puerto Rico, 60% of the water that's produced is lost. 60% of the water produced is lost. So those are components, and of course, seeing how we can make better for the environment. We have, again, the most aggressive pipeline. It is the gold standard of P3s in the United States. We've been able to achieve P3s in areas that other jurisdictions have not been able to do so. And we have what is called the unsolicited mechanism, where stakeholders can propose ideas for Puerto Rico. It doesn't have to be the government initiating. It can be non-for-profits in the private sector making the push for this. Housing is a critical component. We want to use this opportunity to establish a firm policy to get people their papers so they can own their homes, and to get them out of harm's way in flooding areas. Those are the critical components in our policy moving forward, and we've established now on our first action plan how we're going to get there. We also had a potential major housing crisis in Puerto Rico that now we could leverage to sort of use some of these funds to transfer people from informal housing to formal housing, and to avoid that housing crisis and have people own their homes. So that is a very important public policy component for Puerto Rico. Labor force, another historic problem in Puerto Rico. We have the 3rd to 5th lowest labor participation force in the world. 40%. 40%. We need to change that once the recovery funding is done, so that we can have an opportunity for growth. So we're doing certain things to change that. We've established a work requirement for nutritional programs. We've established, or we're working on an employment at will policy. We've already established labor law changes back in last year. We're incorporating an earned income tax credit that, because we are from Puerto Rico, we don't participate from the federal government's part, and our aspiration is to increase that labor participation force significantly. A few more items, and I'll run quickly through these. Education. Education is critical for us. We really want to take a holistic approach, and the gap in Puerto Rico between those that have money and those that don't is incredible. What we're doing right now is we're giving clarity to our budget for the first time in history. We're investing on full faculties for Puerto Rico. We're using all of the mechanisms that are involved, charters and otherwise, so that we can facilitate great schools for folks and that we can facilitate options for the people of Puerto Rico. So a world-class education is paramount for us if we want to get to that vision of Puerto Rico within the future. Healthcare is another important component for us, and here is a great opportunity for changing a model. Puerto Rico right now has 8 regions, and people don't have a choice on what they choose. They get their insurer. They get their providers. They get access to healthcare, but that's the way it's done, and it's limited to a region. Some regions just don't have medical doctors, and they're limited in their scope of health because of that. What we're doing starting this October, we're implementing a single region where everybody in Puerto Rico has access to all of the doctors, where you can choose your providers, and that will give a better healthcare component to many of the people, to many of the folks that are coming to Puerto Rico. Environmental policy is critical for us. It is a critical component going forward. Global climate change, and I know we have a panel, I'll talk about it there, but this is important and it's affecting Puerto Rico right now. 2 years ago, we had a little island called Palominito. Today, we don't have it. It doesn't exist anymore. The weather patterns are changing. They're noticeable. And in islands such as Puerto Rico, we're going to feel the brunt of it initially. So we have a whole set of strategies that we want to implement within this transformation so that we can conserve, we have an erosion policy, and that we can be a model for other jurisdictions moving forward. And lastly, it's the concept of equality for Puerto Rico. And I won't talk much about this, but in order for this to be a prime place, we need to have equal treatment, not only with regards to the United States, but also within our own island. There needs to be equality, equal opportunities. That's where all of these other critical policies need to take shape, and they're very important so that we can achieve that final component of Puerto Rico. So this is just a brief preview of what the canvas for Puerto Rico can be. It can be something completely different, but we need people such as yourselves to be part of it. So my whole aim in this talk, and you give a politician a mic, he'll extend himself, but my whole point and my take-home message is we want you to come to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the most exciting place right now as we're getting out of the recovery phase to rebuild and to innovate. You will have a government that has a commitment to letting you flow and not put obstacles. We want to see your ideas shine in Puerto Rico and make our island the prime place for innovation and for development. With your help, with your commitment, I am convinced that we can rebuild a stronger, much better Puerto Rico. Thank you for the opportunity. Ahí está.